1. Here we go. Hi, this is John Bennett, broadcasting from Miami, Florida. We have here today a special guest, Peter Kuurban, MD, a neurosurgeon from the Netherlands, who is noted for having written or authored the famous application NeuroMind, which is the #1 neurosurgical app in the world, as well as various other applications, which he'll talk about. And I'm just really curious to hear Peter talk about his application as well as his computer background. We have with us also John Hewitt. He's a medical writer, a neuroscientist, and an engineer. So I'll let you guys introduce yourself. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay, first you, John. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm just kind of crashing the party here. I'm interested in the stuff that you're talking about. I've developed Android apps myself in the past, and I'm not going to write an article or anything. I'm just here to see what's going on.
Okay, John. Okay, Peter, welcome.
Thank you. Well, I think you already introduced me quite neatly. I did my neurosurgical training in Maastricht in the Netherlands. I started developing software already during my medical education. It started out as a hobby, and I still call it a hobby, which has been expanding fairly well the last few years. And I just finished my residency in January, now being a staff neurosurgeon, also in Maastricht, focused on functional neurosurgery, brain-computer interfacing. And now I work 2 days in a week for the medical IT department, focusing on clinical decision support and e-health, which is kind of an extension of what I've been doing in NeuroMind for the past few years.
Peter, I'm just curious, at what age did you start to get into computers? Well, start at the very beginning.
Well, rather late, actually. I was 17 when we got our first computer. So I almost finished high school.
What kind of a computer was it? Do you remember?
It was a Pentium with 586 Intel, with specs that you would laugh about now. I think for that time we had a quite large hard disk, which was 850 megabyte.
Wow.
And I think it also had like 4 megabytes of RAM, which was impressive for the moment. It was 1995.
At that time, had you already known you were going to be a doctor?
No. I was in the final year of high school. I know I wanted to study medicine, but in the Netherlands there is a, how do you say that in English? Let's say we have approximately 6,000 students from high school who want to go into medical school, and approximately 2,000 who can be admitted. So there is kind of a lottery, a selection, which means you are not knowing if you can start until only 2 months before. So you have to have a backup. So medical education was my first choice, and psychology was a second.
How was computer? Was your passion bigger in medicine or computers? Would you say at that time?
I think at that time I would call myself naive, and I would still call myself naive, which means it's actually quite funny. I wanted to do medical education from the idealistic perspective of helping people, and while I was not very interested in biology at high school. And also I noticed during my medical education that the neuroscientific part really interested me, and all the other parts did not really interest me. So I already knew quite early during my medical education that it would be either neurology or neurosurgery, because the rest, well, just didn't attract me. The computer part started kind of simultaneously. When we had this computer, I liked it. I liked playing around with it. I also tried to understand a little of the system. I didn't do any kind of programming until I met, in my first year of college, a friend who was doing websites with HTML. And at that moment, you still had trumpet windsock, which means you had to call in for internet. And he taught me something about web development, basic HTML. And then I created something which would nowadays be called a weblog, so a website with some regular posts, which actually just 3 people read, but it doesn't matter. So I got experience a little in web development, basic web development, and then I wanted to have more interaction. So from HTML I started doing a little JavaScript. I went to the psychology faculty because I heard they gave programming courses in Delphi, Pascal Delphi. So I volunteered to do that to get a little more decent programming experience. And I started experimenting with PHP and MySQL for server-side scripting and making websites even more interactive. So this was on the programming side. Then in the Young My clerkships, we have one a period in which you can choose what you want to do. Most of the students went into some specialty which they thought they might want to do afterwards. And I decided to do something in medical IT because there I had 5 months for a combined project and research. So I went to the medical IT department with a request that I wanted to do an educational website on neurology, patient cases, and I wanted to do some research on it. And it turned out, so I developed a site which has interactive JavaScript-based questions about neurology for students, and I wanted to check whether it made a difference if you did open questions or multiple choice. So I did a qualitative research on that. Got frustrated by trying to program open questions correctly because you really have to think about all the synonyms people can use and different ways to spell them. But actually it was fun. I learned something about it. I presented my results at a national conference and got invited for a national task force on e-learning. And what I didn't know at the time, which was 2001, that they were preparing a study trip the year after to the US and Canada for 2 weeks, for which I was invited to go, and the faculty, the dean of the faculty, kindly afforded to pay for it because he thought it would have some added value to hear some feedback about recent developments. And that's actually where I started to see the added value of mobile computing. I had a Palm Pocket computer at the moment, the PDA, which I used for personal agenda and just also as just some toy. And I saw in the US where people were using AvantGo for logging students' performance, for communicating with students, for putting faculty information online, which they could store on their mobile device. So it really was integrated in the educational system, which was actually, funny enough, also the UCLA, where I was inspired the most. So I came back and I started playing around with it, getting involved in developing for mobile computers. And I have been using AvantGo and MobiPocket, which are both platforms at that time for clipping web content. So if you had web pages, you could store them on the mobile device to take them with you. Because at that moment, there was no connectivity. I mean, if you were lucky, the device had Wi-Fi, but in the beginning it even didn't have. So you really needed to synchronize your devices, and that was it. You didn't have any kind of web access. And it's also quite funny because I've been insisting on having the content on the device, physically on the device, until this year, when I had to let it go for some certification requirements. But at that time, I started using those platforms to develop kind of web apps, actually, web pages which could be stored on the mobile device, and kind of recreated an AvantGo solution, which did cost like 20 or 30,000 euros, and I think I could offer like at least 70% of the functionality, the most important functionality, for a couple of €100. So I won 2 Student Software Awards on the International Education Conference about it, which was quite good for some visibility. Kept playing around, but actually it didn't really grew into something big. It just kept going, kept hanging. And then there was an iPhone coming. I already started using Apple in 2005, got really interested in the iPhone when it was announced. Obviously wanted to have one when it was available. Got it from the US because Europe was like 6 months later. And then I had a problem because by that time I've gotten used to some classification systems, which I occasionally needed to have. I had a solution for it using Pocket PC, Palm PDA, web clipping techniques, which I have been working with. but it didn't work on the iPhone. So I was making up my mind, either I'm going to do something for myself, just filing a Word document which I could save on the device, or I'm going to dive into iOS programming, iPhone OS programming at that time, and try to make something which might be useful for other people as well. So I chose the latter, started, took me about maybe half a year to develop the app, and another half a year to understand how the the App Store system worked, because it had some annoying stuff. I released it in the beginning of 2010, and to my big surprise, it got, especially in the beginning, a few thousand downloads each week, which I didn't expect at all. I also started a blog and using Twitter, so that helped. And in the beginning, there were not very much medical apps, so you were quite visible, especially in a small field.
That was in 2010, right?
2010, yes, correct.
No, Peter, did anybody help you with the development of that program at all, or everything was done on your own?
No, autodidactic. Some web forums, but most of it I bought a few books on iOS programming and started experimenting.
No, as far as submission to Apple, and I guess there's certain things you have to do. Did you do all that too? Submitting the application and going through the things you had to do?
Yes, all.
Is it rigorous? Was it quite rigorous getting the application approved by Apple?
Well, actually, as soon as I understood what I had to do, it was not. Okay. But they have some licensing issues, technical licensing issues, files you have to incorporate in the app, which I didn't find very clearly explained.
Okay.
So it took some time, and it didn't work, so I got frustrated, dropped it for a few months, then picked it up again, and at one moment I had to click and I understood what I had to do, and then it was just a matter of weeks before the app was released.
You just did some work on the Neuromind. You just updated it, correct, in March?
Yes. Well, when I started, it was just iPhone, because I was completely stuck by the amount of downloads, which I didn't expect at all. Then there was an iPad, for which I wanted to have it as well, because I had an iPad and I wanted it on the iPad. And obviously Android was coming quite fast. And at that moment I encountered a platform called Titanium from Accelerator, which allows you in a JavaScript-based API to do programming for both iPhone, iPad, and Android. So I switched to that, rebuilt the app in this technology. And I think by the end of 2010 it was available for those platforms. I've been invited to give a TED Talk on it in 2011. And got invited by Intel to port it to Windows 8 in 2012. So that's the reason why it's also available on that platform. And then the most recent developments from last year. Well, first of all, I've been always talking about this decision support. So the classification systems are basically text. It's an ebook, and it's useful, but the computer can do more than just displaying text. So for that reason, I've been talking already in this TED Talk about clinical decision support, and in 2012 I've been able to deliver it on the device. So it's an interactive application of guidelines, a way to get you quickly to the knowledge which you need for a particular patient based on specific parameters. And it gives some very nice discussions about cookbook medicine by people who are kind of afraid for decision support. So that's one thing which I encountered. And the last, if you use your mobile device for such a thing as clinical decision support, you're actually working with the data. You're not just storing them or displaying them, but you're actually kind of manipulating data, because I get input and do something with it to provide detailed output. You will know that the FDA has been working on a guidance for mobile apps, and they released a draft in 2011, which became a final version last year. Fortunately for app developers, the FDA guidance is non-binding. So you can take it as an advice, but if you ignore it, you can't be fined. Situation here is a little different. You have also European regulations on medical devices. There is official regulation for software as a medical device, and the kind of thing which I do for decision support qualifies as software for medical device. So I had to have a European mark, which is called CE mark,
Right.
to comply to the law. And for that reason, I've been modifying Neuromind recently. One of the a few things are important actually currently for mobile devices, mobile applications for medical purpose. If the app does anything more than just reading or storing data, so if you have some kind of manipulation, you have to have some quality assurance in the background, which means you have to test before you release. And in my case, I'm fortunate because I'm also a medical doctor, I can do the testing myself. If you were purely an app developer without medical background, you need to go to the medical people and ask them to check the app if it does what it's supposed to do. And in case there is an error in it, how are you going to minimize the problems that the error gives? So you have to make sure that people can reach you. For example, by the app, you can just send me an email if you found something. And second, in case you update, you have to make sure that the update goes quickly to the users. And in that perspective, most apps can differ from a website. And there has never been a lot of fuss about websites, even though we have interactive websites for more than 10 years. When the apps came, people got annoyed because they said, well, you know, you can download the app, you may not go back to the App Store to check for updates. In case you have an error, how are you going to deal with it? Obviously, if you buy a book and there is an error in the medical textbook and you don't receive any update, you have the same problem. But for that reason, displaying text has been left out of these regulations. But if I do something really manipulating data, calculations on the data, then you have to make sure that if you have an error in it, which might give you wrong advice, and if you follow the advice, you could have severe consequences. You should be able to correct it easily. So either you have to have some kind of cloud service, push service, that you can reach your users to push an update to the app, or you do as I did, which is programmatically the easiest option. I now deliver a framework which is actually empty, and all content is now stored online. And with the availability of Wi-Fi in a lot of places, the connectivity 3G, 4G, I realize that for some people it might be annoying. For example, if you have an iPad with only Wi-Fi and you don't have the Wi-Fi connection available, you can't use the app, which might be the case in some hospitals. But the good thing is that because now the content comes from web-based services, it's much easier to make sure that you get the most recent information, you get it correctly. If there is an error in it, I can correct it and you will have immediately the correct version on your device. So from a safety perspective, I think this is the best solution. And that's about where we are today.
Peter, do you go to other hospitals to help them with their IT departments too? Or you should pretty well stay in your hospital?
Yes. The thing which I'm working here in medical IT is clinical decision support. Try to get it in a broader perspective, because one of the things which we don't have is some kind of standard. We're all talking about standardization in healthcare. We don't have well, there are some standards for clinical decision support, but no single one which is really adopted, embraced widely. For example, a new project which is called openclinical.net. It's a new version of the previous openclinical.org. They have some very nice initiatives on which they try to give you a web-based editor to create building blocks, actually decision support modules, which could be shared also by other people. The problem is that many decision support now, also the one which is implemented in Neuromind, is hard-coded. Mm-hmm. And for me it works because I can look through the development and the user glasses. But what I would like to have is some kind of web-based interface in which you can have the content expert create the flowchart, have the flowchart translated automatically in program code, and have that executed web-based and mobile. And some initiatives in that direction are going on because I think you need a content expert to maintain the decision flow. But you also need to have the technical result in the end. And those connections can be automated more than it is used today. And I think that this would be one of the major steps for decision support to be embraced. Because in the end, looking at least to my country, guidelines are often created on a national platform, even collaboratively between several disciplines. You want to implement them in your own hospital, which means local. And what would be very, very inefficient is that each hospital would have to create their own decision support modules for their electronic health records. So if you would have some kind of standardization, you could, as a national organization for neurosurgery, neurology, cardiology, whatever, say, okay, here is a guideline. We created it. We also created the decision support module. You can download it. You can install, integrate it in your own electronic health records. So you can use it nationwide, maybe even internationally, without having to redo all the work, introducing the chance of making program errors in the local department. And if you have them in the electronic health records, and you're also using other kinds of standards like ICD-10 or SNOMED CT, you might even be able to implement patient-specific parameters automatically. For example, sex or age, birth date, weight, lab values, just name it. So I think from decision support, this mobile application, as you download it today, I think you might consider it as a prototype, which gives you a very good impression of what might be possible. But this should not be the final way we work with decision support.
Well, you do a lot of work in non-neurosurgical areas.
Depends on whether you, I mean, I get a comment a lot, and I say, well, neurosurgery is not only about the operating theater. I mean, much of the work we do it in the outpatient clinic or on the ward. Even if we have residents doing the actual tasks for us, we're still responsible, so we have to do this decision making.
Right.
And in all this decision making, in which we have to adhere guidelines, and for which we can be held legally responsible, I think decision support might be a very good aid to help us actually stick to the guideline, or at least consider the guideline. And I think the technology is rather general, so it's not a solution which is specific for neurosurgery. But I do think it is important, but it belongs more to the clinical part than the surgical part.
So you apply the same principles to the rest of medicine that you learned in neurosurgery, as far as principles of IT, etc.
To me, this is a part of medicine, and thereby also a part of neurosurgery. Yeah.
What are you working on now, Peter? Anything new? You working on any new applications, or you doing anything else with the Neuromind?
Well, actually, Neuromind, the thing which I need to do is also some, from time to time, some content updates. New projects which I'm working on. I'm exploring a little the techniques of data mining and machine learning. But for one thing, it might be interesting for brain-computer interfacing, which is specifically neuroscience, but also for working with guidelines. What we currently do in decision support, at least what I do, I try to follow a three-step approach. First step is the text. The second step is the flowchart from the text, and the third step is the interactive application, which means the flow is manually generated by the content experts. If you have a large amount of data coded in a standard fashion, you could also have the computer search for relationships which we might not be able to see. Also, if you're trying to create a decision algorithm, for example, there are techniques available, which I don't master myself, to have the computer decide which would be the most efficient order of questions to come to your answer. So I think making good use of the data which we collect anyway is kind of interesting, and I had to laugh when I read that data mining is, somebody said data mining is statistics plus marketing. So there was a discussion about what is the difference between statistics and data mining. They said, no, actually there is not much of a difference, it's just some additional techniques. But data mining sounds much more sexy than statistics, so for that reason it seems to be a hype. But that's a topic which interests me. And the second one is e-health. From a patient perspective, I mean, from the US we look at websites like Here Is My Data or the Big Blue Button. In the Netherlands, we are not that far, but there is also discussion going on by patient organizations that patients should have easier access to their data. How about how can we make sure that there is some kind of electronic transition from one hospital to the hospital to the other hospital of patients' data? So you have to standardize, but you also would like people to maintain their personal health record online to some extent, like you can manage your bookings at Booking.com or having your bank accounts arranged by a website. Actually, you can arrange everything except for your health situation. And it's an international concern, and it's national. Many initiatives are going on, but it doesn't seem like we have a really structural, integrated functionality yet. So I'm trying to see how we can create some kind of framework to support this patient empowerment stuff. To me, it's not that much a question if it will come, it's more the question when it will come.
Right.
And I think it will be sooner than later. So the most important question to me is how we can do it in the best possible way, and which means to me that also as physicians we have to be involved, because if we try to escape for the development because we don't like it for whatever reason, then it will still happen, but they won't involve us, and at the end we might be stuck with results which don't work out very well, but then it's too late to criticize. So,
well, that's why it's good that people like you that have a knowledge of computers and medicine can kind of make some changes so that that can come about. For example, a patient traveling, it would be nice if his health information was on in the cloud. So if he went to the Netherlands, his doctor, and he went to the emergency room in the Netherlands, and something was wrong, the doctor in the Netherlands could look in the cloud and see exactly what medications you take, what surgery you've had. I mean, like you say, that's where we're heading, but it hasn't come yet.
Yeah, and also the telemonitoring. I mean, 2014 has been predicted to be the year of the smartwatches, and the kind of funny discussion is the privacy concerns about sharing data. And I'm always surprised if I check my Facebook page. Every day I see people posting about Runkeeper, where they biked, run, walked, how many calories they burned, which routes, and how many time and where. So I think privacy is very relative discussion, but the main difference is that in this case, the individual gives the permission, him or herself, on what to share. Whereas if we have this general discussion about sharing medical data, it's not a patient who gives specific consent for some parts, but it's just something general on which you have to trust that it will work out well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is some work to do there, and obviously there is also the discussion about, suppose you would give patient the full control about what they're going to share and with whom, which basically is, I think, a correct idea. To what extent can it interfere with the correct healthcare process? If people would withhold you as a physician from information that might be relevant because they don't want you to read it. For example, if they come with you with lower back pain and they also have a psychiatric history, might be relevant, maybe not, maybe it is. But if you would block somebody to that content, just say, okay, I don't want you to know that I've been with a psychiatrist for the major depression, well, that's kind of an interesting discussion, but still, I think we need to have it.
Well,
Peter, I had a question.
I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
I was wondering two parts. Is there an open source component to something like Neuromind? And you'd mentioned you use Accelerator Titanium and you're writing in JavaScript. Does that let you do everything that the Android, the Java itself would let you do as far as moving to data collection, inputs and outputs, sensor collection, BCI control, stuff like that?
Well, for the mobile apps, I will leave BCI out for the moment. This JavaScript API is not general JavaScript. It's a specific JavaScript API focused on mobile applications, which translates to native device calls, actually. So if you compile the apps using this technique, you get native. I can open the compile. Well, it's not the compile, but at least the translated code in Xcode. Or you have the Java code, which you can open in Eclipse, for example. it does allow you to access the device features like camera, accelerometer, geolocation, whatever. And it works out fairly well for somebody like me who says I have one specific task which I want to do. Performance is not the main thing. I mean, I don't know whether I would choose this platform for gaming. And then it's okay. If for somebody who would like to start a company in app development, I'd say go native. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to do this full time, then I think it does make a difference if you are able to use native techniques, because you will have more flexibility, more access to the latest features, smaller binaries, to the extent that it matters. I also, when I talk to professional developers, most of them don't use these cross-platform tools. But this morning I had somebody here, a medical student, who came with quite an interesting idea about building an app for medical students with clinical evaluation. Mm-hmm. For those kind of people who try to do it themselves, who don't have a real budget but have an idea, have some kind of technical background, and want to realize it, I think for those, these cross-platform applications are very good. And you have Titanium, you have Sencha, Corona, PhoneGap, there are a few of them, which actually make use of web techniques, HTML5, build it into some kind of web view which is stored on the device, so it doesn't look completely as a native application. Mm-hmm. It might be a little slower, the binary might be a little larger, but in the end, it doesn't really matter. And I think you have to weigh that against the amount of time and maybe the amount of money which you need to invest if you would do it completely native.
Okay. Like something like the LiveCore that uses an external device to read in data would probably be native, is that right?
Yeah, I think that would have my preference.
Okay.
But again, even suppose you're going to do that, you also will have this medical device legislation which you have to adhere to, because suppose there would be some errors in your code, there could be some issues.
So it's not going to be open source?
Sorry?
It won't be open source then once we're talking about a medical app?
Depends. Currently, I have released some parts of the application for open source. For example, the clinical decision support, which I now do in jQuery Mobile. I provide a full source code at GitHub for the reason that people say to me, well, okay, it's very nice, but I don't trust you and your blue eyes. So I don't only want to see the kind of decision algorithm, which I provide in the flowchart, but suppose two professionals agree on the decision algorithm. I say I implement it, but actually I make a programming error, which means that in the end the application doesn't do what the algorithm says it would do. You will still have a problem. So for that reason I decided to put also the program code online. So if people would be interested and are able to read it, at least they can check it. I try to avoid the black box. Mm-hmm. But in case you would build this program, like you say, would measure your blood pressure, for example, I can, and you connect it to an external device, I can imagine that people wouldn't be really interested in sharing their source code. But in the end, it doesn't matter. The only thing, I think, if you're going to do projects like that, you need a budget. And if you have a budget, I think going native would be the preferred way. The cross-platform application is actually, or the cross-platform development tool, I think is the best opportunity if you are low on budget, or maybe you want to do it yourself as a hobbyist programmer. It might save you some time and make things a little easier.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, I'm looking at my battery, which says 10 minutes left.
Okay, Peter, a quick question. I'd really like to get the neurosurgical community together globally, and I know you guys done that already with neurosurgic.com. Do you take an active role in that organization, or is that Steen Fredrickson and Dr. Skoglund's kind of thing?
Especially those two. I'm not very active in neurosurgic.com. I've been involved. I mean, they feature Neuromind. I feature their website. I'm associate editor-in-chief of Surgical Neurology International, which is actually the largest open access neurosurgical journal in the world. So you can access those contents for free. They also are kind of partnering. So it's neurosurgic.com does a very good job, I think, in aggregating some knowledge. provide it to the professional, and also it has some good forums for people to discuss. So I think I provide mainly the application, the NeuroMind. SNI provides the articles and the framework around for videos, also discussion. So I think it's complementary, and for that perspective, there is some kind of collaboration. But especially from my perspective, it's not very intense.
Well, you know, Peter, I think that I'm glad you got a chance to see Google Hangout, because I think it's a really good platform for people to engage, especially overseas, all over the world, to get together and have conferences. And I hoped to do it with neurosurgery, and hope to do it with most specialties, to get people together and form communities, I think. And you mentioned the mobile trend today. It's certainly, people are spending more time on the mobile devices, and Hangouts, basically, they're built for mobile devices, and people will be able to talk to each other on their smartphones overseas, and be able to have a conference or a discussion, or a group like this with 3 people having a conversation about something that's interesting. I think this platform, Peter, you're going to see a lot more of it. Google Hangout in education, and all aspects, including IT. I think you're going to see more of it. People getting together and getting better education.
Well, actually, this is my first encounter with a Hangout, but I'm actually pleasantly surprised. I really like it.
Yeah, Peter, I hope we have you back for more things, and I'll certainly take your advice in trying to get the neurosurgical community worldwide together on this type of platform. For example, I know it's very hard to get neurosurgeons together because you guys are so busy, but if there could be a time, like a weekly time, maybe on the weekends, where neurosurgeons could drop in, and not just the United States, all over the world. I've got a lot of feedback from Europe and the Middle East neurosurgeons that are interested in this type of platform, and participating, not on a weekly basis, but it's kind of a drop-in type of thing. Like one week they can do it, next week they can't, and have someone like you present something, or have a didactic discussion, or whatever. But this particular platform, Peter, has a great future.
Oh, we might see. Maybe I can also discuss with the guys from Surgical Neurology International and Professor Osman. You might know him.
Yes.
Could be a kind of interesting experiment also from that website, and to see, because what you mentioned, Middle East, but also Africa, they kind of skipped the whole cable network, but there is kind of a lot fairly good wireless network available, which means they try to access the content which they can't afford to pay for in regular journals with the subscription fees from open access journals, but also these kind of resources, YouTube or this kind of videos. So it might be quite interesting to have. We still have to work out on the topic, but I think there would also be interest from those areas in this kind of technology and this kind of ways of communication.
Yeah, I think this is a killer app. And you're going to see it, Peter. And I'll communicate by email, and you can give me tips on people to contact to try to form groups. But I've got a lot of feedback from neurosurgeons that, yes, I'm interested. I want to participate. I looked at Neurosurgic, and it doesn't seem too active. It seems a little slow right now. But I think this will give a shot of adrenaline to get people more involved. And you can do it on the go with your smartphone. You don't have to be tied to your desktop. So, okay, Peter, before your battery runs out, I certainly like to thank you for taking the time from your schedule. You have a lot to contribute in many areas of medicine, and certainly I think you're going to take to this platform. So thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you for the invitation, and hope to meet a second time.
Okay, Peter, hang around. I'm going to stop the broadcast, okay?
Okay, good.
Thank you.